All right, so we're going to get started despite the empty seats in the room. Welcome to Finals Week. It's a little different than previous semesters if you've been here before because we as faculty are required to have regular class on both days of Finals Week. So you didn't really miss anything. I was going to have regular class today anyway. And then everything will be due on Wednesday. Should be the same for all the rest of your classes too. So you should end up with two classes. Some instructors or professors may have decided to put their final earlier in the week and then have a regular class meeting afterward. But regardless, you're supposed to meet both days. It's part of the new 16-week semester that everybody's dealing with. So today we're going to go through and do architectural perspectives from SketchUp into Photoshop, which I think are pretty fun. And they're kind of the capstone of your SketchUp work in terms of once you get to this stage, you can create the really beautiful big collage to go on your poster board. And that's obviously the purpose of what we're doing today. These are not assignments, as you guys know, so you're only turning this in as an exercise. So feel free to experiment to your heart's content. That's just fine. Remember, of course, that the portfolio is due next meeting, so on Wednesday it's due. You do have to come. You do have to turn in your portfolio. I'll have a little course survey for you to fill out. It'll be electronic. You'll log into the computers, click on the link, and it'll take you to one of those surveys. You've done these before, but this helps me customize the class, learn things about what you liked and what you didn't like, and believe it or not, it's actually really important to me that you do it. I've learned a great deal about the class. Part of making the class a good class is getting your feedback at the end and seeing what you liked and what you didn't like. So I encourage you to take some time and actually think about your answers. You'll do that. I'll bring donuts, as I always do. I actually just ordered them today. So we'll have a bunch of donuts. You'll turn in your portfolio. You'll do the course survey, and then you'll be free to go at that point. Remember that the class is officially over at, 11, because that's the end of the last class. So anything that you turn in, any comments that you do that are after 11 on Wednesday, don't count. So everything has to be done, completed, turned in. That's the end. It's official. Move on. Do something else. Do one of your other finals, etc. So just trying to make sure everybody knows that's how it works. If you're planning to do a resubmit on any of your assignments, which I know some of you are, if you do that resubmit, it's perfectly legal to do the resubmit. There's no reason to hide behind your resubmit. Make it obvious. So make a brand new post. If you were, for example, redoing assignment 102, create a brand new post that says assignment 102-resubmit. So I'm for sure going to see it. There's no harm in doing that. And I will go through and I will do those regrades at the end of the semester. I do have today a grade sheet printout for each one of you. That grade sheet is current as of Wednesday, as of last Wednesday. So if you posted new things over the weekend or you added comments over the weekend, those are not in the grade sheet. So just be aware of that. But it is a kind of a gut check. Make sure that I didn't miss something that you think was posted, etc. So I like to do that at the very end so you guys can have a look and make sure that everything looks good going forward. Remember, of course, that your final portfolio is worth 30% of your overall grade. That is enough to bring you up in your final grade and to bring you down in your final grade. So if you have, for example, a B on this grade sheet, or you have a B going into the final, if you do really well on your portfolio, you have a shot at getting an A. If you do a really terrible job on your portfolio, you have a pretty good shot of getting a C. Does that make sense? So that portfolio is worth enough to where it can swing your grade. So just because you have a B or an A going into it, if you do a bad job on your portfolio, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up in the same place. I think that's about it for all the announcements. Are there any questions going forward toward the end of the semester? Yeah, Ryan. Are you submitting the portfolio on website as well? Yes, I do want an electronic post of it, and I want the printed portfolio. This is the one thing in the class where I will actually grade the printed version of it, but I like the online version because everybody can see what it is that you've done. A lot of times they can look at the images and it's clearer, or the print problems and whatever. It may be, and this will probably be something that I'll ask you guys in the survey, it may be going the direction of no longer printed portfolios because frequently people just want PDF versions if you're applying for a job or you're applying to school, they won't accept printed versions anymore. So we may be going that direction, and I'll probably ask your opinion on the course survey as to whether you think I should go that direction yet or not. But for you guys, for this semester, you're giving me a printed version and you're posting the online version. Any other questions? Not yet? OK. If you think of anything, of course, let me know. So today we're going to talk through creating an architectural perspective using our SketchUp model and some Photoshop skills. It's very similar to what we did with the section last class. The difference being, obviously, that we're not cutting a section through our model. We're actually going to use the whole model in our work here. And so if this were a real project, I would have done a site visit, and I would have gone to this particular location in Yosemite Valley, and I would have said, OK, this is where we're going to build our building. This is where I think the site belongs. This is where the building belongs on the site. And I would have taken a bunch of photographs while I was there. And that's important. Unfortunately, we didn't get to go on that field trip as much as I would have liked it, so you were relying on internet pictures. But the key here is that instead of getting the angle right in SketchUp first and then going and finding a picture, I'm going to go find the picture first and then match my SketchUp to the picture. So I'll jump over into the Creative Commons search right here, and I'll type something like Yosemite Meadow. And I'm going to do a Flickr search because I think the picture quality tends to be a little bit higher in the Flickr search. All right. And so as I start to go through this, I'm going to pick an image that I can install my building into. And so while there are beautiful images, like this one, for example, it's a really pretty image, I don't have a place here. Let's see if it makes it big enough. There you go. I don't really have a place to put my building into this scene. So I have to envision where is my building going to go and how's it going to fit within the context of this scene. In here, there's no real place to put it. So I'm going to keep looking. Maybe. You gotta love it when the internet works this slow when I'm trying to demo, right? And so I'm going to work slowly through the pictures and try to decide. This picture's not bad, but based on the scale of this tree, my building would have to be rather large and it would get clipped, so that's not the best place for it. Now, this one is a beautiful picture, but my building would be pretty far away in this picture. It would be small. So that might not be the best picture either. This picture, the horizon's too high and the grass is too low, so that's not the best place. This one has the people in it. That's not that good. Something like this one, OK, this could work. So I'm going to open it in a new tab and just leave it floating up here. And then I'm going to keep looking. And I think this is something that is a good strategy long term, is that as you're starting to collect these images, you find ones that you think will work, and then you open them and stick them there for later use. Because you may find that on first glance something looks good, and then you come back to it and you say, yeah, I don't really like that anymore. So bear with me a little bit while I get through this. All right, that's probably enough for me to pick from. So now I can go back and I can start to look at some of these various images. So something like this would work out pretty well. It looks like it's taken right at about noon if I'm looking at the shadows. Yeah, I could probably do work with this one. So let me go ahead and download the original size. And once it's done downloading, I'll go ahead and copy it over to today's folder. I'm going to look at some of the other ones too, just in case. I don't like the oversaturation in this one too much, so I'm going to skip that one. This one's pretty cool. But if I look at the overall size and scope of this, my building would end up being fairly small here. So I don't think that's the best one to collage it to. This one could work nicely. Go ahead and download that one too. This one's not bad. This could work as well. And I've seen this one done before too. The advantage to this one is it does have that path, so you might be able to integrate that in as an example too. So I'll go ahead and download that as well. So I went ahead and downloaded a bunch of these. I did that on purpose because sometimes you may find that one or the other ends up working a little bit better as you start to set up the scene here. So I'm going to let those finish downloading. All right, so they all finished downloading. I'll copy all of those over to my flash drive. So let me take all of them. I'll go to copy, and we'll jump over into today's folder. And what are we? We're what is it today? 127, I think. And let me paste those in. And so I'm going to start with this image, I think, as the trial run, because I think it could be fun to use that path and try to integrate that. And like I said, with these collage works, I'm just trying this off on the spur of the moment. I haven't preconceived that, oh, this image works perfectly or whatever. So I'll leave this one up. And now the key here is that I need to look at the image, and then I need to look at my SketchUp file, and I need to have the two start to match up. So I'm going to go ahead and make my SketchUp file on one side of my screen. I'll take my Yosemite image and put it on the other side of the screen like that. And then I'm going to start to think about, in SketchUp, what would cause this to feel like it belongs in this particular scene. So you can help yourself out a little bit. If I showed the large tool set, if I went to View and then Toolbars and checked the box for large tool set, there is this position camera tool. It's a little person with an X below it. The advantage of that position camera tool is it gets the camera down to eye level. So that's a little bit close, so I'd have to zoom out just a bit. And I may have to place the position camera again, like that. But it puts you down at eye level, which helps get things kind of aligned for you. So if I'm looking at this image here against my image over here, I want to make sure that I'm kind of looking at my building in the direction that I want to look at it. The size starts to feel like it's OK. The trees are going to be up over. This needs to be zoomed in just a little bit. The path looks like it's going to integrate pretty well to that point right there. Yeah, that could work. That could work as a lineup. So once I feel like I start to have these two images looking good, I'm going to take the SketchUp file here, and I'm going to save the scene. So I'm going to go back to my window, and then we'll show the default tray. I had that closed, so I had a little more space on it. And I'm going to go to my Scenes drawer, and I'm going to save this scene. And right now it's called Scene 2. Let me rename it, and we'll call this Perspective 2. And that lets me come back to it and make sure that I can view this again. I'm going to try it out and see how it works in my scene. It may or may not be quite the right angle. I may have to make an adjustment. So before I get too far into this, I'm going to do an export of this particular file. So let me go ahead. I am, by the way, in my right here under Styles. I'm in my Default Styles and in Hidden Line. There it is. I'm going to turn off my section cuts, my section fills, my axes, and my guides, which is going to leave me with just the line drawing. With just the line drawing showing here, I'm going to go up to the File menu and go to Export 2D Graphic. And I'll choose my flash drive as a place to save this. And so this is perspective 0, 2. And it's going to be lines. Under options, I'm not going to use the view size. I'm going to make this larger. We'll do a width of about 3,000 pixels. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll click on Export. Once I've done this export, I'll minimize SketchUp, and I'll jump into this photo in Photoshop. So let me open up Photoshop. Maybe. All right, with Photoshop open, I'm going to go to File and then Open. And I'm going to go pick that photo. Is this one right here. There it is. I'll press Control followed by 0 to make it fill the screen here. Then I'm going to go to File and then Place Embedded. And I'm going to drop in this perspective lines. I'll switch this perspective lines from being in normal to being in darken, so I can kind of see through it. It's too hard to see. Let me go back to normal, and I'll just change the opacity down a bit. Maybe like that. And I'll move this down and see, how does this line up? Does the perspective feel right? I might have to make this a little bit bigger. That. Sorry, it's so back to normal here. There you go. Now you can see it a little bit better. So I'm kind of lining up where my entrance is, trying to get the size right. Yeah, that would come in there. Yeah, that feels about right. The height feels about right. The perspective feels about right. So I think that's a pretty good combo. The key here is that you're evaluating how this is going to look in the context of the photograph that you picked. If you don't like it, you would go back and make adjustments in SketchUp. You'd tweak the angle of the perspective to try to make sure that it feels right. The biggest mistakes that I see people make when they do this is they set the perspective like this, where they're looking down at the object. This is never going to line up quite right, because typically the camera of the person who took the picture is at eye level, not floating above like a bird. So you're going to want to get down at eye level when you take that image from SketchUp. So it's kind of a key thing to keep in mind, is that you don't want to be up here, you want to be down here. I do have my scene saved, so I can jump back to my same saved scene. There it is, to make sure when I do the rest of the exports. OK, so this is a little counterintuitive. I went through and I made sure that this all worked fine, but I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, and I'm going to actually close my original photograph altogether. We'll come back to that later. I just wanted to make sure that they lined up and they looked right. So let me go back to SketchUp, and I'm going to do all of my exports now. Let me turn off my section fill, my axes, and my guides. There it is. And I'm going to go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And this was my lines version. I'm going to go back through and re-export everything. I'll make sure that I am at 3,000. Perfect. Actually, I needed that to be a little bit bigger. So let's go ahead and bump this up a little bit. Let's do 5,000. And I'll export that. Yes, I want to replace it. Perfect. That was my first one. Next thing I'm going to do, and this, by the way, is a repeat of what we did last class. It's available under the tutorial section. If you go to the SketchUp right here, Styles for Photoshop, it'll walk you through exactly what I'm doing right now. So the next one that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my Xray mode. So I'll go from the Select in my Styles drawer here. I'll go from Select over to Edit. And here I'm going to go to the Face Settings. It's the second button over. And then I'm going to click on Xray to see through. And this may or may not be valuable long term, but sometimes it works out kind of nice because you see more of what's happening behind. I'll go ahead and go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. All the settings are the same, but I'm going to call this one Xray. And then we'll export it. Good. So now I have the X-ray. We'll turn it back to regular. I have two versions that I suggest doing with the guides, for example, where we turn on the guides and we do an export. For me, these guides aren't really doing a whole lot, so I'm not going to do that export. The next one that matters, though, is the shadows. And so I can go to View, and I can turn off guides, and then I can turn on shadows here. And in this context, we see the light and the shadows coming down. But does this shadow scenario match the photograph that we had? So if I went back and looked at the photograph here, this one's a little bit hard because we're not seeing a lot of shadow on the ground. There's a little bit of a shadow on the edge here, right along that edge. The tree has a little bit of shadow toward the front side right there, nothing on this side. So in this particular scene, the sun is slightly forward of the camera, and it's shining from this corner down to that corner. So when I come back to this view, I'm going to need to adjust the time of day. So I'm going to open up the shadows drawer over here on the right side, and I'm going to adjust the time of day so that my shadows are coming toward us but are fairly short. I could also adjust the time of year. My guess is that in terms of the time of year, the shadows would also be rather short. So we're going to go backward toward maybe July-ish, somewhere in there. And we'll shorten up those shadows, maybe a little bit. Yeah, probably right about there. So I'm making the shadows match what the photograph has. Now, this would be really easy. If I actually was the one who took the photo, I would know exactly the date and time that I took the photo. So it would make life a lot easier. I could just match up the date and time, and there I'd have my shadows with my correct orientation. Doesn't work that way for us. We're going to approximate it. But before I do the export for the shadows, all I want to do is see the shadows only. So I'm going to go back to the Styles drawer here. And under Edit, and then the first option here, the Edge Settings, I'm going to turn off the edges so that I get an export with just the shadows, just the light and dark of the shadows. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. This is going to be called Shadows. And I'll go ahead and export that. We can turn back on the edges. Now I'm going to turn off the shadows. So I'll go to View and then uncheck Shadows. And I'm going to start to play around with the styles. I'm going to go back to Styles. I'm going to go to Select. And I'm going to go to one of the default styles here, something like this. And again, this is so that I can make selections rather easy. And it's probably this one will work nicely. Let me turn off my section cuts, my section fills, my axes, and my guides. Like that. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this one's just going to be called Color. And we'll export it. Good. And then I'll go over into my Sketchy Edges styles, and I'm going to pick two. The first one is Airbrush with Endpoints. I like this one. I'm going to go to the View menu. I'm going to turn off Section Planes, Section Cuts, Section Fills, and Guides. And then I'll go ahead and export this. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. It does not look as good here because of how the scale, but when you do the export, it's going to look a little bit better. I'll call this Airbrush and export. And I also tend to like the pen gray style. If I can find it. There it is, pen gray. I'm going to go View. I'm going to turn off Section Planes, Section Cuts, Section Fills, and my guides again. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this was the pen gray. If you want to use any other styles, that's perfectly OK. You can go through and pick some of your own styles. These are just the ones that I've used in the past and had success with. So I've done my exports now. It's time to jump back over into Photoshop. But remember, I closed the photo. So in the first round, I opened the photo and I dropped the line drawing into the photo. For the second round, when I actually do the work, it's much easier to put the line drawings together first and then drop the photo into the line drawings. So I'm going to do it in the opposite order this time. I'll go to File and then Open, and I'll start with that first line drawing right there, and I'll say Open. There it is. And now I'm going to bring in all the rest of the pieces. I'll go to File, and then Place, Embedded, and we're going to bring in the Xray. We're going to go to File, and then Place, Embedded, and we'll bring in the shadows. We'll go to File, Place, Embedded, and we'll bring in the airbrush. We'll go to File, Place, Embedded. We'll bring in the pen gray. And we'll go to File, Place, Embedded, and we'll bring in the color version here, like that. So I have all of those versions stacked up. Remember, I'm going to turn off the color version. Remember, with the rest of these versions, I'm going to go ahead and change all of them into the multiply blending mode such that I see through and get to see my drawing, which I think already enhances the look quite a bit from what the default SketchUp was. Now, because just like with the section, I'm going to end up with lots of layers, I'm going to spend a little bit of time cleaning up my layer structure and renaming layers so that it's fairly obvious. So the first one here is the background. I'm going to go ahead and say Layer from Background. I just right-click on the layer itself and choose Layer from Background. And we'll call this one just Lines. There it is. And then this will be Xray. So I'll double-click to change the name, and we'll call this one Xray. Next one is Shadows. I'll double-click and type Shadows. Next one is Airbrush. I'll double-click and type Airbrush. Next one is the pen gray. I'll double-click and type pen gray. Next one is the color. And really, that one's only used for the selection purposes anyway. So I have them all lined up. That's good. They're all stacked up on top of each other. That's also good. Now let's go ahead and bring in that background photograph and start to get that one aligned correctly. I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. And I'm going to choose my photo. There it is. And I'll go ahead and choose Place. There it is. This time, I'm actually going to adjust the transparency of this photo a little bit so that I can see it through my drawing. So I'll just go over here to Opacity. I'll make that a little bit transparent. So this will help me line it up. Let me Control+ to zoom in a bit. And we'll start to make this a little bit larger. I'm holding down Shift as I work with this. The purpose of the Shift is to keep this all in its correct proportions, so I'm not stretching the image. And like I said, I'm trying to have this path line up with where my entry would be. That's on purpose. I think that'll work out nicely. And in this scenario, I'm starting to get there. Maybe a little bit bigger. I want to make sure, sorry, had a sneeze coming. I want to make sure that the height seems appropriate. My horizon line is about where the horizon line would be here, which it is. So all of this feels pretty good. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and commit to this particular size. Looks pretty good. Might take a few little adjustments. Yeah, right about like that. Sometimes using the arrow keys can really help on the keyboard to make fine adjustments. All right, so I'll go ahead and commit to it. That looks pretty good. I'm going to change the opacity of this file back up to 100%. There's my photo. And I will also rename this to be Background. So it's called Background now. Because it's called Background, it's probably time to bring it into the background. There it is. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing it because I haven't actually cut it out just yet. So I need to do a little bit of work. The lines layer should also be changed to multiply. Now I'm going to see it. There we go. So I need to cut it out. And I need to pay some careful attention to my model here because I have some areas where I have windows. Yes. But I also have this little sliver right here where you can actually see through. So I need to make sure that I'm accounting for that. Let me turn off everything except for the lines version. There it is. And for right now, to make it a little easier to see, I'm going to turn off the background. There we go. So I'm just seeing the lines version. I'm going to go ahead and use my magic wand to select. I'm going to click and hold on the quick selection tool, change to magic wand. And I'll select everything in the background, plus that little sliver right there where I'm seeing through. If I had windows that looked all the way through, I might select those as well so that you could see through the building. I didn't end up modeling those, so it's not going to do a whole lot for me. Once I have those selected, I can turn back on the background layer here. And on the background layer, I can go ahead and click to add a layer mask, which is going to allow me to see my building cut out from the background. And I like to do it where I add the layer mask first because it helps us to see, does it really line up correctly? Do I feel like it lines up correctly? Looks like maybe my path is off just a little bit. So it might take a little bit of an adjustment there, but I'll go with it. It's reasonably close. And it also feels like, if I zoom out a little bit, it belongs at the right scale. The building's about the right height. The trees are about the right height. OK, this feels pretty good in terms of setting this up. So at this point, my file still looks like it's sitting, my building still looks like it's sitting on top of the ground. So I need to find a way to integrate this building into the ground. And we did this with people before, but I'm going to use the grass brush along the edge here. I can't use the grass brush along this edge right now because this is still a mask. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the mask to the layer. I'm going to right click on the mask and say, I thought I was going to apply it, but it won't let me apply the layer mask. Interesting. I may have to rasterize this first. I'm going to go to Layer and then Rasterize Smart Object. And I bet now I'll be able to right click and say Apply Layer Mask. Yep, there we go. So it permanently cuts out what I created with my layer mask. So now I can actually do the correct grass brush here. The other thing that's going to happen is the background is actually going to end up on top of the layer stack, and these are going to show up behind it. So now I can work with the background. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to use the grass brush, which we found last class. Because they're a legacy brush, we need to go to the little gear here in the brush menu, and we're going to turn on the legacy brushes. Restore of list, yes, go ahead. And we will look at the legacy brushes here. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. And I think it was under the default. And there it is, the grass brush. That's the brush that I want. And once again, I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. I'm going to hold down Alt to copy from here. And then I need to start to create my grass. That brush is a little bit large, so we'll make it a little bit smaller here. And we'll go ahead and we'll cover up the front edge of this building. You have to be careful when you're using the grass brush when you have these different color regions, because you can see I have a direct copy there. So you may have to go back and change and mix in some other grass to kind of cover that up a little bit. There. And we'll keep working my way around here. Now my building is relatively in plane, so there's not too much that's sticking out forward. If you had part of the building that was much further away or something that was coming much closer to you, you may have to make the grass brush bigger toward the front and smaller toward the rear. Mine's kind of all in the same plane, so I'm not overly worried about it. So I'm just going to cruise right along here and cover it up. Something like that. All right, so I've gone through and I've added that. And now if I press Control-0 to zoom out or Control- to zoom out, the building now feels like it's grounded into the scene versus floating on top of the scene. And so that's a key element toward getting this building to feel like it belongs as part of this particular scene. Just as you guys know, I also integrated this wooden path. Right there, that part of the photo lines up with my drawing. I have to decide whether I want that line. Let me see if I can switch to something where I can point at it. This line here to be there, or whether I want the wood to kind of butt into this altogether. If I don't want that line to be there, I'm going to need to make some modifications. So I either need to do a little clone stamp right along that edge, or I need to go into my various layers and delete that most line. Depending on how I create the building, I may want to collage in a different texture, a different material there, which may help that to integrate a bit as well. So I'm going to press Control- so we can see it like this. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the color version, so we're back to just the black and white version. This is something that's you have to decide, is it worth it for you or not, and at what level do you want materials to be applied? Do you want this to feel like it's a drawing that's sitting in the scene, or do you want it to look photorealistic, in which case you're going to apply materials to it? So for right now, it does feel like the Xray is a little bit strong. I'm seeing, well, you guys aren't seeing so much. I'm seeing too much of it. So I'm going to drop the Xray down to maybe only 30%. So there's just a little bit of it there. Maybe about like that. That looks a little bit better. But the shadows haven't integrated just yet. The shadows are on my building, that's fine, but the shadows are not on the ground. So we need to spend some time with the shadows. So let me take, first off, let me take the shadows, and I'm going to bring them up on top of the background layer. There we go. So at least the shadows are being cast down on the ground here. So that's good, but they're also a very stark edge. And since they're in the grass, we wouldn't have that kind of a stark edge. So let's turn off for a second everything but the shadows and have a look. So there's my shadows. To soften this up, I really need some grass standing up on that edge of my shadows. So I'll use the same grass brush with the clone stamp. So there I am with the clone stamp. I need to be on the shadows layer. It's not going to let me do anything because this is a placed object. So I need to rasterize that first, which is essentially embedding this into my file. So I'll go ahead with the shadows layer. I'll go up to Layer, Rasterize, and we'll choose Smart Object, which makes it just something that I can edit. And now I can come in here. I'll hold down Alt to copy from the white. And we're just going to work on softening up that front edge of the shadow. So you may have to zoom in just a little bit. And we're going to soften up that front edge of the shadow. And you can verify that you like what it looks like by turning back on the background. And you can see that that shadow no longer has the sharp line that it had. This sharp line has gone away, and it feels like it belongs in the scene. So I'm going to do the same thing along the rest of my shadow here. So we'll keep that clone stamp going. And we'll keep that going a little bit further. Now I'm going to stop as I get close to where that path would be. I might have gone a little bit far actually. Let me stop at the building. I'll stop right there. Because when I get to the path here, it's going to be sharp across the path. And then it's going to pick back up on this side. So as I start to get close here, I need to pay attention with how far I carry on that grass brush. So there, I've stopped it there. I'm going to start it back up right on the other side of this path, right there. And I'll keep going like that. Looks like it copied the wrong thing there. So let me do a little bit from there. Then I'll hold down Alt, copy from back over here. I'm going to make this brush a little bit smaller as I go back along that edge. along there. Hold down Alt, copy from, and we'll work our way there. Now, I've got a little bit of a problem along this back edge, right there. I need this to actually be the opposite. I need the grass to be standing up with the darker color, not the lighter color. So same thing along this edge right here. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself a region to copy from with that gray, because it's a little bit small. So let me just pick a point down here. I'll use the eyedropper tool to select that gray. I'll use the paintbrush tool with a much bigger brush to paint in that same gray. I will end up deleting this. I'll use the rectangular marquee tool to deselect. And then I'll come back to my clone stamp, hold down Alt in the center of this gray region, come up here, make this brush a little bit smaller, and I'll copy along the back edge of that shadow, like that. I also need to come down kind of this edge there a little bit. Yep, come down that edge. Like that. And I may need to go back and copy from the white again. So over here, that brush a little bit bigger. There we go. As I start to work through, a little bit more right in there. Go back, Alt, copy from here, brush a little bit smaller, cover that up just a little bit. So I've worked my way through creating that edge with the grass. And when I go back and turn on the background, you're going to see that it's going to feel like it belongs in the scene. So it takes a little bit of work to soften that up, but it's a really important part of making this feel like it belongs as part of this particular scene. I'm going to go ahead right now and delete this off of my shadows layer. I don't need that anymore. And I'll press Control minus to zoom out, and we can see that the shadow's been applied. If I turn back on the rest of the lines layer, there we go, we can see that this now feels even more like it's part of the scene. It also may be that my airbrush is a little too strong, and maybe I like it better like that. You have to decide what the look is that you're going for. So in this particular case, this is a pretty simple way of integrating the building. It's a line drawing that's integrated into the photo. This may be enough. This may be the look that you're going for. You might not need more than just this. It still feels like it belongs in the scene. That's good. What I would suggest doing, however, is making sure that you put a person in the scene before you call it a day. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a person into the scene. I'll go to File and then Place, Embedded. I have people saved. You guys also worked on people in your exercise 107. So you can go back and you should have those people. You can also find them on the course website. There's a bunch of people. And I can then pick a particular person. So let's say, for example, I like this person here, this woman walking, and I want to place her into the scene. There she is. Let me zoom out a little bit. She's obviously too tall, and the lighting is on the wrong side of her. So we'll make her smaller. And then we also need to flip her. So I'll go up to Edit, and I'll go to Transform, and I'm going to flip horizontal so that the light's on the correct side of her. The light is a little bit back of where the light is in the scene. So if I spent more time, I could probably find a better person to integrate. Remember, the trick about people is making sure that their eyes appear at the horizon line and match up. We have the horizon line of our SketchUp model. If I were to turn everything off, no, I have to commit to this for right now. If I were to turn everything off and turn on the color version, we know where the horizon is, so I could adjust her appropriately. So we could go back into Edit, Free Transform, and we know where that horizon line would be. About eye level. She's probably a little bit shorter, or could be. And then I can turn back on the background. Oh, I have to commit to it first. Let me turn back on the background now. There we go. And she feels like she's part of the scene and is the right size. Remember, if she got closer to my building, she would get smaller. But she still very much feels like she's floating on top of this wood walkway. So I want to make sure that I integrate her by adding a shadow for her as well. So I'll go ahead and go to File and then Place, and we did this earlier in the semester. There is her shadow. I need to reflect the shadow, so we'll go to Transform and we'll flip horizontal. There it is. I need to make the shadow match up with her size. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it helps if it's a little bit close before we start. There we go. Her shadow matches up. I'll go ahead and commit to it. And at this point, I need to make the shadow fall down. But remember, we talked about shadows before, coming down off the top of the building, very vertical. So her shadow is going to be very short. It's going to be right in here, very short. So I'll go ahead and go into my Edit, Transform, and I'm going to use Skew. And I like Skew because I have more control. And I'm going to pull, to start, I'm going to pull both of those down, straight down, so that the shadow's just straight back from where she is. Then I'll start to move it to one side. So move it to one side. We'll shorten her up a little bit there because the shadow shouldn't be too big. Let me zoom in a bit. I need to make sure that this lines up with her foot. Turns out she's barefoot. Right about like that. And if I do it correctly, I should have a pretty good sense of her shadow, and it's falling on that. Now, right now, the shadow is solid compared to what it is here. So I need to make sure that her shadow, right here, needs to switch into the multiply mode so that we can see through and see the wood planks underneath. So now she feels like she's part of the scene. It looks like I clipped just a little bit of her bottom of her toe there. I need to make an adjustment. So I'll take the shadow, and I should really rename this to be Woman Shadow. And we can call this one just Woman so that they're clear. And then on the Woman Shadow, I want to make sure that that part of the toe isn't there. So I could add a layer mask on the shadow and then paint with black and a much smaller brush. Also a brush that had a sharp edge to it. Right, like that. So we weren't covering up that little bit of shadow. I'll press Control 0 now to zoom out. I'm going to turn off the color version again and turn back on my lines. Except maybe the airbrush. I'm not liking the way the airbrush is looking. And so now, at the bare minimum, I think this is a pretty reasonable collage effort because I have a person, I understand a sense of scale, and my building feels like it belongs in this particular scene. I can start to take this steps further. I can collage in behind the windows. I can start to add materials. I'll show you some examples of that. But this is kind of the general target of the minimum of what you're going to ultimately be doing. I think the style now is moving away from trying to be completely photorealistic, like this is exactly what the building's going to look like, and more in a, this is a representation that's an attractive thing to look at. It's not real. It's just a way of trying to look at a particular scene. So a couple things. I can go ahead and crop out all that extra white space that I don't need. So I'll go to the cropping tool right here, and we'll shrink this down like this, and I'll go ahead and commit to that. There you go. A couple things to just point out. When I was using that cropping tool, I don't know whether you noticed it, but rule of thirds, this rule of thirds is very close to the horizon line. It also lines up nicely with my building and my content. She's about on this edge of the building, which is about the rule of thirds. So remember way back when we talked about composition? That's something that should intuitively start to come out for you guys. The fact that the path starts here and weaves around into the building ties that together too. So those kinds of little tricks really help to make your designs and your models shine. I was looking in on the 220 class last Wednesday, and Anthony was showing a bunch of examples of these kinds of collage work that are done by professional companies. trying to inspire the 220 students to, you know, improve their drawings. And I think one of the undersung things about those professional examples is how well composed the images are. That by itself, even if you don't have that much skill in Photoshop, if you compose your images well and you make them exciting and you make them unique, it really makes a big difference when you go to do these final collages. So think a lot about composition, because that really, really matters. You know, having the waterfall in the background certainly doesn't hurt either as part of this. So I said I would keep going and I'd show you a little bit more collage work, and I will do that, but I wanted to kind of stop at, this is a good stopping place, if nothing else. So maybe the next step would be to put something where all of the windows are, to put a little bit of cloud reflection or something where all of the windows are. I'll use my color version here. Let me turn all this off. Right there. To make some selections, I'll use the magic wand tool again. We'll zoom in. And maybe the color one doesn't work that well. Maybe it would actually be better to use the lines version. We'll see. Make sure that I'm on lines here. And I'm going to select each one of those windows. Like that. And actually, before I go through that effort, I should find and bring in the sky that I'm going to reflect here. So let me go into File, and let me go to File, Place Embedded. And we'll go back to Collage. We'll go back to Skies. I do want to pay a little attention to what the current sky looks like. Because if, for example, it's this kind of a sunny blue sky, doing a cloudy sky is not the right choice. Doing a thunder cloud is also not the right choice. So you need to kind of be aware. There isn't a cloud in the sky, or they're very wispy high clouds. Theoretically, there could be a few clouds, but you have to be aware of that when you go to place these. So I'll go back to File, Place Embedded. And I'm going to go into my clear skies, or relatively clear skies. Maybe something like that is pretty good. Yeah, this one's even better. And I'll drop that one in. Let's bring it up toward the top here. I'll commit to it for right now. And we'll bring it up toward the top of the layer stack. Yeah, there it is. Not too bad. It may take a little bit of some transforming. We'll go into free transform here. I think it needs to be a little bit higher. It may be helpful to change that opacity a little bit so you can kind of see through one to the other. I definitely don't want the ground of this showing, so we want that to be a little bit lower. Yeah, probably somewhere about like that would work. So I'll go ahead and commit to it. We could change the opacity up for right now. I probably should reverse this image because the brighter is on this side and the darker is on that side, just in terms of making the shadows match up a little bit better. So let's go ahead and change that. I'll go to Edit and then Transform, and we'll flip horizontal. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and use my lines right here to select where all of the windows were. I'll go ahead and click on the magic wand tool. I'll press Control+ to zoom in, and I'll pick each of the windows. Make sure I'm on the lines layer while I'm doing this. Hold down Shift. That's hard. I've got lots of little things. That might actually be better to do it with a polygonal lasso tool, but we'll get there. If I make a mistake, remember I can hold down the Alt key to subtract from the selection. Like that. Back to the Shift key to add to the selection. You may find that you have to zoom in a little bit more to get those last little pieces. And there we go. Press Control-0 to zoom out. And now that I have all of those selected, I can go to the sky layer right here, and I can click on the Add Layer Mask to cut it out for just where those windows would be. I can adjust the opacity, or I could adjust the blending mode. I could go into darken mode, for example, which is going to show as more of the lines show up. Oh, I don't like the airbrush. There we go. We can start to see it with that little bit of color in the background of the windows, which is not a bad strategy. I think it helps highlight where the windows are, but it does make it a little bit less photorealistic. It's a little bit more of a collage at that point. So I can do the same thing in terms of material. I could start adding concrete to my material, etc. To me, that's starting to push it a little bit far. I'm liking the look of this, and I think it's looking pretty reasonable. You may find that adding another person inside behind the glass is advantageous to give a sense of scale. But again, I'll let you guys start to play around with it and go forward. My goal today is to not spend the whole time talking. I've done this lecture where I keep going on and showing you more and more things. We have enough things to do at the end of the semester. You've got enough things to work on where I don't want to spend all day with me talking. So I'm going to let you guys go. I'm going to let you get started working on this. Yeah? I went and looked for them. So I did a Creative Commons search and found this one on Flickr. It's pretty easy. When we did those integrations before, earlier in the semester, I gave you some of the sample files to try to put them into. On this one, I'd encourage you to try to find your own, because it's part of the process of trying to line everything up and making it work. And so, like I just did, I went online, I found this, and then I made it work. And so any one of the images that I had used, this one, for example, I could have used that one, and it would have looked fine. This one, because of the angle of the trees, probably I would need to skew it to kind of correct that. The image that I ended up picking here didn't end up needing to have too much of a skew adjustment to it, and ended up integrating nicely. I saw this path, and I kind of felt like, oh, I can make that work into my entrance. That's part of why I picked this one as an example image. Any other questions? No? OK, I'll turn you guys loose. If you have questions about the portfolio, ask me. If you have questions about this, ask me. Obviously, you've got a lot to do, so I'll let you get to it.